on sand.
And just keep bringing them drinks so they just stay in one place.
Yeah, so that's it. You have a bunch of people over for cards night, sitting at the table in the middle of the room where you put all the weight. They're sitting there, and then have the kid run around.
I think we're doing some science here. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Deputy Editor Matt Milham.
What's up?
Rob Wadzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Hello.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Man.
That was very dramatic.
You got to keep this interesting, right? So we heard from a couple folks regarding our discussion of HVAC zoning in episode 207.
Mm-hmm.
Among them was the luminary of our industry, Mike Girton. And we'll start off with what Mike had to write. I anxiously await the automatic Friday morning download of the FHB podcast and listen to it as soon as possible, just waiting for any egregious error one of you might make so I can send in a correction. Mm-hmm. For the past year or more, I've been disappointed. You've given no misguided advice to listeners who write in. That might be the best compliment I've ever got.
He's too kind, especially coming from him. I know he likes us, but...
Yeah, he might have to get his hearing checked.
He's listening to their different show. This is supposed to go to Woodworking's podcast, right? So I'm writing to just add a little to your discussion of HVAC zoning and comfort, a topic prompted by a listener question in podcast 207. I frequently install single-zone air-delivered heating and air conditioning in homes I build and those I rehab for rentals. Using my own 3-story house as an example, the temperature difference between the top floor and the bottom floor and room to room varies by only 2 to 3 degrees at most. Periodic monitoring in my 6 rental homes, a mix of 1, 2, and 3-level homes, shows similar temperature uniformity. I attribute this to 2 things: energy efficiency and central return HVAC ducting. It gets better because a lot of folks will tell you that central return ducting is inferior, but here we go. Air tightness makes a tremendous difference in comfort. In a tight home, there's little stack effect. Without warm air leaking to the top of the house, there is no cold air leaking on lower levels, so the temperature stratification is minimal. Well-insulated exterior walls and ceilings reduce the rate of heat flow, so the temperature of the wall and ceiling surfaces is similar to the interior air temperature. This means your body doesn't lose heat to a cold wall or ceiling in winter or vice versa in summer, so you feel more comfortable. Although central return systems are considered inferior to fully ducted return systems, they can help circulate conditioned air more evenly throughout a house if planned out well. By using either generous door undercuts or other return air pathways like passive wall ducts, high-low grills on opposite sides of the wall, jump tucks through the ceilings, or devices like Tamarack Technologies return air pathway grills. So that's something that you put on the bottom of a door. It's like a little register.
You cut it into the whole bottom of the door, yeah.
The air is more fully circulated throughout the house, leading to more even temperature. Another thing that can help keep temperature even is a continuous ventilation system like an HRV or ERV. This equipment greatly circulates fresh air throughout the house, and in doing so can help balance out temperature variation. It gently circulates, not greatly. I meant to say. Comfort in a home is very complex. Air temperature, air movement, humidity, air quality, and mean radiant temperature of the exterior walls and windows all play a part and have to be considered holistically when designing and building a house. Comfort isn't solely the realm of HVAC.
Yeah.
Great point.
Great point.
So, in one of the summit talks by Peter Yost, he was talking about how you expect a car to just work, right? You expect it to keep water out and to keep the air from leaking in, but cars are made by the hundreds of thousands, where every single house is unique and it's in a unique place. And it is pretty crazy that we think that we can just go in and put the same system in 100 different houses and expect it to work the same way.
Especially when there's holes in the house. And that's Mike's point, is like, nothing is going to work correctly if the envelope is leaky.
Right.
And I think we say that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But it's a great point, because if you have leaks,
fix
or if
those
you have
first.
Poor insulation, that's probably number one.
Agreed. So here's someone else who wrote in. This is, forgive me, Philip from Columbia, Maryland. He says, hello, FHB podcast. A recent home remodeling project and addition on a 1970s split foyer. The homeowner had complained that the HVAC system would make it cold on one half of the house and hot on the other. The ducting was all original, but the HVAC unit had been upgraded within the last 5 years or so. As part of our contract, we installed 2-zone mini-split for the 2-story addition, one zone for the living room upstairs and a second for the bedroom downstairs. We also ended up having the HVAC company that installed the mini-split do what he called a rebalancing of the existing system. This included testing the airflow at each supply vent and assessing the duct sizes throughout the house. They determined that one side of the house's ductwork was oversized and the other half was undersized. That, coupled with the fact the basement level was half underground, complicated the matter. The home was also poorly insulated and had air leaks galore. That's very typical of the homes that were mass-produced around here in the 70s and 80s. The fix was to add a diverter to the top of the plenum. I think they call that a vane, which is meant a piece of metal meant to direct air one way versus the other when it hits a T. So it's shooting more of the air the undersized way, I presume.
Like a kick-out flashing for air?
It's very much like that. I was going to say more like a rudder.
Okay.
Yeah. Where was I? Let's see. The fix was to add the diverter to the top of the plenum, which directed more air to one side of the house. They also restricted a few of the oversized ducts and installed more free-flowing vent covers, replacing the plastic ones from the Home Depot. All the balancing work for the reasonable price of $450. After the work, they retested the air at each vent, assuring they were equal. The homeowner raved about the very noticeable difference and said it was some of the best money she ever spent. The only caveat I have with this work it was done by my longtime and trusted HVAC guy who retired almost immediately after work was complete. He was surly and knowledgeable old-timer who was greatly missed, as I have swung and struck out on everyone else I've tried since. Keep up the good work. That's also good advice. Have your system rebalanced or...
You know, every like high-performance home HVAC person we talk to talks about how important commissioning is. And I wonder how many people get systems commissioned after they're put into their houses. I mean, certainly
Nobody.
Yeah, I mean, and I wonder how many HVAC contractors out there are offering services like this. Because
So the one exception is we went to those passive houses in Brooklyn a few weeks ago, and that's part of the deal there. It's just like you have to do it. The equipment is like meant to do, as you pointed out earlier, be a one-size-fits-all for millions of homes, literally, and it needs to be set up for the individual system. So it's an important, often overlooked step.
Yeah.
This is from John. The part of your podcast talking about unheated shops and storing temperature-sensitive things like paints and stains, epoxies, etc., has a reasonably easy solution, one that I've used, but I can't take credit for. I read this many years ago on a boat builder's forum for storing the epoxies that are used so often in their field. An old refrigerator can be picked up for free from almost anywhere. It doesn't need to work. If it does, you don't need to plug it in. It is a nice size, insulated, already has shelves, and is mostly airtight. Since it is insulated and airtight, you drop in a small incandescent light bulb in cold weather to keep it warm inside. Your supplies will be kept organized at a nice temperature, and the cost is really only what it takes to run a 60-watt light bulb. Hope this is helpful, and I'm sincerely interested in hearing all the reasons why this is a bad idea.
It's a great idea.
It's a great
Actually,
idea.
No, I feel like I mentioned that my father-in-law used to store stuff with a light bulb in a cabinet in his box, but the refrigerator makes even more sense.
Oh my God,
because
it's perfect, right?
Airtight and insulated.
Yeah.
And
I would want one of those things that when you open it up says, "Hey, get out of here, fatty."
But I mean, this is the same method a lot of people in the Northeast, anyway, use to keep their well houses warm.
A
Like you just-
refrigerator?
No, an incandescent light bulb
Oh.
in there. So I don't know that just because you're dealing with generally an uninsulated tiny little building, I don't know that you would need a 60-watt light bulb in there. You might be able to get away with like a nightlight.
Like 15?
Yeah.
10?
I don't know. I don't know how small, but it has to be incandescent.
Yes.
My sister
Yeah.
and her brother, or my sister and her brother, her husband, my
Your
brother-in-law,
brother-in-law.
figured that out the hard way because their bulb went out and they replaced it with a CFL because that's all they could find where they were. This was during a time when supposedly like incandescent bulbs were going to be unavailable. You know, that whole thing kind of fell apart. But
This is your
they put a
smarter
CFL
sister.
Yeah, they put a CFL in there and their well froze.
Oh, man.
See, I'm considering this refrigerator idea, but I think I told you I'm trying to get all the junk out of my workshop that's not like the project that I'm actually working on.
Right.
Which means I'm going to be tempted to put this refrigerator out in the yard where my neighbors can see it instead of in the shop. Do you think that's a bad idea?
Where I grew up, that would be totally acceptable, and that's where you put your second refrigerator. It's on the porch.
I mean, I've got some leftover metal roofing I can put on top of it and maybe paint it the same as the barn.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
I think that is a great idea. We'll talk to Michelle about this later.
Yeah, that's actually the phrase she usually thinks. She usually says, "Yeah, that's a great idea."
So this is Dan from Westchester. First, I love the podcast. Even though I'm not a builder or anywhere in the trades, I get a lot out of it and enjoy the banter immensely. His question: when we bought our mid-70s split level, there were no ceiling lights, and we had several installed across the bedrooms, hallway, and kitchen. This was before I learned about energy penalties. Unrelated, I also cut a hole in my roof for an attic exhaust fan. But oh well, you can't stop stupid sometimes. Well, I hope you didn't put the fan in. Don't do that. I'd like to replace the recessed can lights with slimline ones, but I'm wondering if you have any best practices for how to cover them after the fact. Solid foam on top, or would loose fill be sufficient? Any suggestions are appreciated to have the best positive impact from the change. Thanks very much, and keep the podcast going. Oh, and go Bucks. So he's from Pennsylvania, so he's rooting for the Pirates, as I would too. So what do we think about this, gents?
So a few years ago, I did a video series with Mike Gerton at our old project house about air sealing attics, and he did some demonstrations of. I saw you had some illustrations in the slides for today.
Don't steal my thunder.
Okay, I won't talk about those. But well, if that's your thunder, I'll let you go first.
No, I don't know.
Okay, but the question before I even describe what I'm about to describe is, I feel like this has changed. The thoughts on this have changed over the years about whether you can enclose light fixtures, but we're talking about removing them altogether. So I guess I would say.
So how would you, if you wanted to take them out altogether, what would you tell him to do? I mean, you still need an electrical box up there, right? So that has to be air sealed.
You mean from the old electrical box?
Yeah, so he's going to pull out the can light. Mm-hmm. He's going to want to put these slimline fixtures in. So you need a conventional electrical box to mount it to. And
Some of them, not all of them.
Some of them have their own boxes.
Oh, my
built in.
goodness.
Yeah, some of them have a tiny little box that you run the cables into, and then it's sort of like a driver.
Well,
And
has
then-
it's a built-in junction box.
Yeah, and
okay.
then that basically just, the way I've seen it, is just sort of just sits on top of the drywall. I don't know if that passes code, but then the lights themselves just clip to the drywall.
And then how do you seal that to the...
That's the question. Like, I don't know if I've never seen like installation details where they say caulk that flange to the drywall.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of doing that in my house right now with those slim LED lights in the attic above my laundry room and my daughter's bedroom, and I was tempted to caulk them right to the drywall, but then I'm like, well, they're made to pop out with these little springs. What if I want to service it, or
What are you
if
going
there's
to
a
do
problem?
to it? You can't fix it.
But yeah, I also think it would just look kind of crappy with like a bead of caulk around it. So I actually went upstairs and built little plywood enclosures several inches away from it around them. And it might be overkill, but it's along the lines of, I think, what you were finding some illustrations for. Mike Gerton had done something like that. I think it was out of rigid foam that he taped and or foamed the seams with.
Oh, my God. So now this is when it gets really exciting.
Yeah.
So you jest. So Larry Armanda years ago, who has since passed away, and I do miss him, he did some fantastic work for Fine Homebuilding, but we paid him to test can light enclosures. And what Larry, who's a great scientist and former electrician, his background is he was like an industrial electrician and monitored electrical equipment to see with thermography to see if it was going to fail. And so he has all these components you need to test this particular thing. So he built enclosures, a number of different materials, drywall, EPS, polyiso. And what he found is when you do this, and we're talking about a conventional can light and air sealing it after the fact. And to our question asker, Dan, I would say, Dan, leave the can lights you have in place and build an enclosure on top. And this is how you have to do it. So Larry found out that the temperatures inside these boxes can get dangerously hot enough to damage the insulation on the conductors that's supplying the electricity to the fixture. And this happens when people don't put the right bulb in, and put especially a halogen bulb, which gets stupidly hot in there, and it'll get up to 160 degrees inside that enclosure. So what he found to be the best thing to do is to use what's called a 10-mat enclosure, which is made of mineral wool, and to permanently install a LED retrofit into the existing can light, and then tape or caulk this 10-mat enclosure to the ceiling drywall and seal the penetration where the electrical cable comes in, and that solves all the problems. And all the details for this are going to be on the podcast page.
Yeah, and so the 10 mat basically looks like a cardboard upside down flower pot.
It looks like
a
hat.
It's because like you were saying, that was one of the reasons why there was always wishy-washy, ideas of how you were supposed to do this in the old days, because most can lights had either incandescent or halogen bulbs in them, which would get very hot. And even though they have those little stickers in there that tell you the maximum wattage, people would stick whatever size bulb.
Yeah, because it'll take any bulb. It's got that Edison base.
And I know from experience about the electrical insulation, because there was a can light in my house that burned out, and I went up there and looked, and the bulb was too big for the light, and it completely cooked all the insulation on the visible portion of the wire going up to the fixture. And luckily there was enough wire in the fixture that I was able to pull it out and strip it back and fix the thing.
I guess the point we're trying to make is this is high stakes, that you can screw this up. So look at the podcast page for direction on how to do this safely, because for a long time, as you suggest, Rob, the weatherization industry would just, as a matter of course, put these enclosures on these can lights, and if somebody puts the wrong bulb in, especially, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're fortunate that all of the new energy-efficient technology runs at typically a cooler temperature than the old incandescent bulbs. But
I still hear people who don't want to substitute their incandescent bulbs because of the color, temperature, and the cost, or whatever reason, or they just can't simply get to the bulb easily, so they leave it in there as long as they can.
Yeah.
But if this guy does want to do all this, I mean, there are other options
Sure.
too, like
Go
the
ahead.
ones you mentioned that have, you can get airtight boxes for those, the round boxes with like a sort of a gasket on the face so that it seals nice to the drywall. And then you would go up and probably foam where the cables go into it. And yeah, there are lights that clip. I think Panasonic makes a nice one that I have at my house that I haven't installed yet.
It goes in an existing can light?
It doesn't go in an existing can light, but it goes in a, like a round junction box,
And it's meant to replace a can light.
I think it's, basically meant to replace a can light. But I mean, I'm not exactly sure what he's saying. Like, is he like getting rid of these entirely, or is he just dealing with a hole that's bigger than he needs for
I think he was trying to get rid of
lights?
them entirely because of the many conversations about the energy inefficiency of can lights. But I would suggest you don't have to get rid of them. You could just seal them correctly.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is, if you're willing to make a change this big, it's probably a lot less work to just go up there and build and install some of those pre-made enclosures properly than it is to rewire and pull out all the old lights.
I think so, but
cost-wise especially.
Yeah, and I mean, you can certainly take out the cans and put in junction boxes or use the fixtures like you described that have the internal ones, but yeah.
Yep, and some of those retrofit kits for the LEDs that go in the old can lights have foam gaskets on them too, so that's got to help a little bit.
I would think so.
I read a study on GBA, and I don't know if it's completely relevant to what you're describing, Rob, but some folks went in and tested what were described as airtight can lights and found that they are not at all airtight.
No, I still go and caulk all the seams on them when I put them in. But again, like you were saying, you foam if you're putting a hot bulb in there, I would use all non-flammable materials anywhere near that thing.
And even if you don't put the wrong bulb in, someone down the road could easily do that. Maybe even the babysitter whose light goes out while you guys are away and then rummages around and found a bulb in the closet and sticks it in the can light.
Right. That's why you replace the whole thing with that LED.
Yeah,
light.
That's
So
part
they can't
of
do it.
Larry's rationale is to just make that a non-issue.
Yeah.
But I did before these LEDs were really affordable and readily available and nice color qualities. I did can lights in my attic, and there's a shallow flat ceiling in there that I mostly did with cellulose, but wherever I put the can lights in, I put mineral wool insulation all the way around them because I was like, you know what? I know that stuff doesn't burn. I mean, I know the cellulose has fire retardant in it, but
the cellulose manufactured industry is going to be writing us angry letters from.
I still used it as most of the insulation.
That's a great question, Dan. Thank you. Hello, FHB podcast. I hope that you are well and having a good day. I have a question on what to use for covering of external insulation on a block stem wall. I have a 1902 farmhouse remodel that I'm insulating from the exterior. I was even going to insulate the block foundation wall with EPS or XPS foam because of the ground contact. I currently have 4 inches of polyiso on the exterior wood-framed walls and stop the insulation at the top of the concrete block. Below this poly foam, I plan on using 2 inches of XPS, but I do not know what to cover this with to make it presentable because I'm not a fan of the look of blue or pink foam as my exterior finish. I've also seen it in gray, Jeff, so... What type... I have looked at GBA wall details, and this detail just points to using metal. So what type of metal should I use? Should I just use 24-inch flashing metal? There has got to be a nice-looking covering to put on this foam for it to not to look so cheaply done, besides putting on a layer of concrete or masonry just to cover it. Any suggestions would be appreciated. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff's from Henderson, Kentucky.
So aren't there some readily available stucco type products? I mean, you figure this is like an ethos type wall, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could do something like that, like an acrylic based stucco that's meant to go over foam.
Yeah, there are products. Styro Industries makes at least 2 different ones that are, as far as I know, 100% acrylic that you can like either brush or spray or
And this is meant to
trowel on.
look like stucco when it's done.
It can, yeah. You can texture it to look like stucco. You can do like a brushed finish on it, or you can just leave it after you put it on. Yeah, and apparently it goes on pretty easily. The one product is supposed to be able to take quite a hit from a weed whacker.
Boy, that's something I see all the time.
Yeah.
Is exterior foam beat up by string trimmers, I gotta say.
And that's that product is called Tough 2.
Does it have a scrim behind the acrylic layer? Or?
Yeah, well, the details kind of differ depending on the product you're using. Some of them you just have to kind of put a mesh over the seams and corners. Some of them you have to put a mesh over the entire face. The Tough 2, as far as I know, you have to put I know you have to put the mesh over the entire face of the foam. But people love that stuff, and apparently it lasts for a really long time, and it is much less prone to cracking than a regular parge coat. They also do make a cementitious or cement-based sort of parge coat type thing.
And that you would have to use with expanded metal lath, I presume.
No, that also, it's surprising like how well like mortar will stick to a lot of different kinds of foam, especially EPS foam.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So that I mean, it's, I would say, pretty commonly done, like applied right to the foam. You may have to scratch it up a little bit with like a wire brush, which can kind of damage the foam a little bit, but it'll stick.
Seems like it'd be worth it to do a synthetic or some kind of mesh over it. I mean, it's not that big. To me, it just seems like it's probably going to be the best looking and easiest to apply consistently kind of finish is one of those.
What do you guys think about the metal suggestion? And I looked up the detail on GBA that he's describing.
Yeah, I don't
coil
really
stock,
like it.
basically?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of reasons I don't like it. Mostly because of the amount of exposure that he has on the one end. Because I actually emailed him, and he's got about 2 blocks exposed on one end of the house and about 5 on the other. So that's about 40 inches roughly.
You think it's going to be wavy?
It's gonna, yeah. I mean, you're gonna get a lot of oil canning with metal with that much exposed, and he's gonna have a seam because I don't know if coil stock that comes in like 48-inch wide coil stock.
Right.
That
Yeah.
He's gonna be able
or
to.
there's going to be like 2-foot wide panels run vertically.
Right, with a seam in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but there are actually quite a few insulation products that come with like a hard face on them.
And how is that secured?
They'll secure basically with clips. Sort of, I guess the closest analogy would be like the way that you attach standing metal or standing seam roof.
Yep.
And then they have like a tongue and groove edge, and then you can sort of caulk in there when you apply it. So, it's
Who makes
air sealed
that?
and everything. There's a bunch of different ones. What is it? WallGuard
All right.
is one that actually, I mean, after it's installed, the facing on it's like 5/16 of an inch thick, and it ends up kind of looking like a panelized concrete wall. I think they're 2-foot by 4-foot panels, and I mean they look pretty nice. And there's a bunch of other companies that make a pretty similar thing. Techcrete, very similar, ends up looking almost exactly the same.
Yep.
Also attaches with clips. And actually, Styro Industries also makes a panelized product that's similar, but 2 of them have kind of like a granular coating that, I don't know, to me looks
Looks
kind of
like
like
roofing?
kind of looks like an asphalt shingle. I don't love it. And they make another one that has like a stucco texture already on it. And I think those are all just sort of like glued on panels, which I'm not sure that I love the idea of. I mean, you could also do veneer, like a stone veneer. Or
It's going to be proud of the rest of the wall, though.
it may be. I mean, you can do like a really thin, like you did
Thin
that.
brick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thin brick. There's also thin stone. But also, I mean, his polyiso is 4 inches thick. If he's doing 2 inches of foam, then he's got sort of 2 inches to work with. So it doesn't have to be proud of it. But if he did something like Versetta stone, which is sort of like he could screw that back
So
to the
Versetta stone
block wall.
or like stone panel,
Yeah, it's a panel veneer, and it doesn't require any mortar. It
and
just
it hangs a lot
screws
like
on.
siding, right?
Yeah, it hangs a lot like siding.
Yeah, so if you're looking for something that's really polished and finished, a product like that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking diamond plate,
Diamond plate.
aluminum diamond plate.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to go for diamond plate, I might as well just do the whole exterior of the house.
You could also,
Michelle would love that.
She
too.
would actually. She actually wants me to redo our house in
diamond plate?
galvanized sheet metal.
yeah.
Maybe
I think
not-
that's a great look on the right structure. I don't
yeah,
know.
certainly not on a
Victorian.
neighborhood Victorian.
Oh man,
I can make it work.
Truck bed liner. That's another option.
I've heard
Honestly,
that-
I think people
yeah,
used
I
it.
mean,
You can
that-
get you can get that in different colors, and I'll bet you that's really not that much different than some of those liquid applied finishes that are made for the foam.
Yeah.
And it sure is durable.
Yep. And that stuff from Styro Industries, those acrylic things, as far as I know, can be tinted to pretty much any color you want.
And
They
you-
have a
do you-
bunch of stock colors, and then but they do custom colors because it's basically like similar to paint.
It's paint. It's
Yeah.
thick paint, right?
Yeah.
Do you trowel that on, or does it roll on?
There are
or?
different. There are different methods. Yeah, you can trowel on some of them, or you can thin them and spray them on with like a hopper style sprayer, or you can use drywall tools and put it on if you wanted. Some of them you can brush on. Yeah.
All right,
Man.
Matt. So sounds like you did the most homework on this one. So you better send me all links to all of
Yeah.
that stuff for the podcast page.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said because you want to do this on your house.
Well, actually, I have been thinking about that because I mean, my house, I can't insulate from the inside very easily, and I've got about 1 foot to 2 feet of exposed, crumbling brick on the outside, and I would love to put a couple inches of foam and something like that, liquid applied finish on the outside. It sure would make my basement a little bit better.
Do you have any basement insulation presently?
No,
Do you have any basement insulation presently?
On the inside, there's some
Is it bats or foam?
foam.
And it's on the top half of the wall?
It is on the entire height of the wall, on one area of the basement.
Did you run
It
out of
came like
money?
that. No, it came like that.
Okay.
It's just it's sort of an area that it's basically like the entryway. And so it's just like this big exposed concrete area. And so they foamed in the basement, they foamed the ceiling and the walls there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
so I've had this old house for almost 20 years now, and before I even worked for Fine Homebuilding, I used to go onto the Building Science Corp website, and they have details that work for every climate and every type of house. They're really awesome resources, and they had a drawing of some insulation detail, I'm pretty sure, where they hung rigid foam on the top half of the wall and left the bottom half exposed I think it was mostly because it was like a sensitive masonry, like rubble wall or something like that, where you don't necessarily want to enclose it, or you maybe have moisture coming through that you want to.
There's also less of an energy hit lower down the wall you go, right, Matt? It's
Yeah,
the
the
greatest
temperature.
Well, that
heat
was
loss
the-
is through
Yeah.
the exposed part of foundation naturally.
Sure, that was the whole point. Is that you've got pretty even temperatures once you get below grade in a cold climate, and it's really that top super cold part that's exposed to the outside that you need to worry about.
I got to make a confession.
Yeah.
I don't have any foundation insulation either.
No.
And it's something I know is low-hanging fruit with regard to really improving my home's energy performance, but I just don't think there's easy ways to do it, retrofit. Outside is a problem for the reasons that our listener wrote in about, like, how do you protect it? How do you make it look good? Doing an inside requires some kind of fire barrier, and I don't know. I've just been putting my head in the sand, but I do think it's something I should be taking more seriously.
So now, isn't one of the polyiso Dow products have that fire-resistant layer that you
So
can
Dow
expose?
Thermax,
Yeah, Thermax.
has a polyiso board with foil facing, and You can use that oftentimes in crawl spaces not used for storage, and different inspectors have different ways of defining what that means. It does have an ICCES number, which means that if your inspector gives you a hard time about its flammability, and you have it what he would describe as a crawl space, or she, you can often use this product because it has this certification.
But not in a usable basement.
It depends. Yeah. But it's really not made for that. So I've just ignored the whole thing.
There's one other thing I want to mention.
Please.
So I've seen people use like cement backer board also for this.
Yeah.
And I've even seen it called out on like Department of Energy details, like where, construction details, where they're like making recommendations for, various kinds of like energy retrofits. But I have not been able to find a single manufacturer document that
says that's okay.
That says it's okay. I've seen Duroc they have instructions for applying it to stud walls outside, but I've not seen anything about applying this stuff to concrete block over foam or anything like that. So I don't know that that's acceptable.
Yeah,
but now
I see people do it all the time.
If that's something that someone's going for, I wonder what the price is comparable for, like, in commercial buildings. They have the kind of hardy board that's 1/4-inch thick, big sheets, 4x8 sheets of cement board, just like the hardy plank siding. That's kind of the same idea, really, right?
I've seen that detail.
Yeah, but attaching it to anything other than a stud wall, I have not found a detail for that, or like an ISS's ER report, or anything.
There's nothing of
like
that.
I've looked all over the place. I have not been able to find it.
But you thin.
If anybody knows where it is.
Yeah.
You thin set that stuff down to floor sheathing sometimes. Can't you just use a similar type of adhesive?
Well, that's what I don't know.
Yeah.
You might be able to, but they don't call that out. So, and all of them, they don't want the
liability.
They don't want the liability, but they also want those products to be covered with something.
Sure.
So like you can't just leave it exposed generally.
Yeah,
well, it is so attractive. I can imagine you want to.
But
you wouldn't even see it in a lot of applications if you only have like one block exposed or 1 foot of
But so if you're going to
exposed.
bother doing that, and we've kind of discussed the fact that rigid foam is a decent substrate, like, why don't you just go straight to the stucco or the parge coat or whatever the heck it is, instead of putting that stuff on there.
Yeah. It's the main thing is that the cement-based products are more likely to crack. So, like they still will recommend, like most masons will still recommend that you put, galvanized metal lath over that and, use some sort of modified concrete or modified cement so that it doesn't crack.
So has this guy he hasn't installed the foam insulation on the foundation yet?
No, he's working on the rest of the envelope presently in an addition. I got to say, his work is really good. He's like doing it right.
Staggering the joints, taping the seams on both layers.
And I think that's reclaimed polyiso. It looks like the roofing flavor because it has that felt facer on it instead of the foil.
Itchy fiberglass stuff.
It's awful. But he's doing great.
Have any of you seen any houses with that foam glass stuff used over the foundation? I know, was it somebody at Building Green put that on their house? I think it might have been Alex.
What are you talking
like
about?
dense glass gold?
No. Foam glass they make bricks, and it's basically, it looks like pumice. It's basically foamed, pulverized glass put through an oven that bakes into these porous. It's the same stuff as that Glavel stuff that you just featured in the issue. In fact, I think
we should tell people what that is because they probably haven't seen it yet.
In fact, the Glavel, I think, is basically a waste product that
It's glass.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, I think the same people who originally came up with that were just using the leftovers from the foam glass bricks, I thought, or at least the same technology.
So what's Glavel?
It's pulverized glass they add a foaming agent, and they run it through a furnace, and it bakes into what's almost like pumice. It's like a super lightweight, porous, air pocket filled glass gravel that you can use as a substrate for a foundation so that you don't need to put rigid foam insulation underneath it.
And it's using stuff that would otherwise be garbage.
And the guys, I went on their website and the guys were saying, we could put one of these things anywhere where there's a glass manufacturing facility and take all of their waste products and turn it into solid, inert, insulating quality building materials.
I don't know a lot about marketing, but I think it needs a better name.
Glavel. Yeah, I think it was probably made by a couple of engineers. They're not marketing people, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. But it seems like a very promising product. We will say that.
But for years now, I'm pretty sure it's called foam glass. I'll put it in the notes. But it's the same basic product, but made into bricks that you can use to face your foundation as a drainage plane and as insulation.
Seems like perfect.
Yeah, bug proof. You don't know if that's the big thing is when you start going down south, you have to worry about the termites.
They love foam.
They don't generally don't think they eat glass.
Man, that's cool. So that's in the current issue, Rob?
The Glavel?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Ben writes, "Hi, I'm a general contractor / carpenter in the Minneapolis area, and I look forward to hearing the podcast each week." People have been saying such nice stuff about us.
I don't know why.
Very kind.
It is very kind. It's been very helpful to hear from others around the country about what projects they're taking on. Over the past 5 years, we've been renovating our own home, a 1920s farmhouse. We are finally getting close to finishing, and that last project is the basement. Before drywall goes up on the ceiling, I've been struggling with how to achieve a strong floor system above. The main level has 2x8 Douglas fir joist at 16 on center, spanning around 13 feet. There's a lot of sag and deflection, and so I've scissored on 7.5-inch LVLs to each joist with adhesive and lag screws, as well as adding solid blocking in between joists to help stiffen it up. Even with those measures, it still deflects a lot. I'm guessing that the diagonal 1x subfloor is probably a weak link in tying this floor system together, and I will at some point remove the original hardwood flooring and install plywood, along with leveling it. Just curious if there are any thoughts or recommendations on more ways to address the issue from below. I've considered some type of center support, but the ceiling height is barely 7 feet as is, and I don't plan to do any partition walls down there since it's one open room. Hopefully that's enough information. Appreciate any feedback on the situation. Thank you. All right, Ben. I called Ben this morning.
Yeah?
Yeah, got him on the phone. So I had to ask him, when he said deflection, did he mean deflection or did he mean bounce? And I think a lot of people use those terms interchangeably, but I don't think they mean the same thing, at least not to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it in that.
So
those
you're
terms.
thinking deflection is like if
Bending.
you have a certain amount of weight on something and it's curved because it's bending, as opposed to you're running across the room and
And
you're
the china
the china
jingles.
shaking in
Yeah.
the cabinet. Yeah.
So he said when his 2-year-old runs across the kitchen that everything bounces. And I think that's a different problem than the joist being overspanned. I think it's because there's not enough dead load on this floor system. And I'm pretty sure that when he puts the drywall on the bottom of the joist, it's going to solve that problem. And
Yeah.
so if it's all screwed up, he can blame me because I told him not
I
to
was
worry
gonna
about it.
say, is that just a guess of yours there? Or?
So there is some evidence to support this theory. Once in a previous life, you guys know I worked at a lumber yard, and we had a customer that bought an I-joist floor system that part of truss joists, and I don't know if they still do this, they would attribute a comfort number and what it took into account is the amount of deflection and bounce. And they'd done studies to determine what people find acceptable with regard to those two things. And this score was really high on this floor. It should have not been a problem at all. But the client felt it. You could hear the glasses clinking when people walked around. And the way we solved this problem was to have the contractor put strapping, I think it was on 12-inch centers, which does a couple things. It ties the joists together so they act more uniformly, more cohesively, and it also adds some weight to the floor, and that solved the problem. So,
But now one of the things you pointed out as a possible reason there was along the lines of what he was guessing too, is that if the subfloor above is kind of thin or flexible, that you're not transferring that load to as many joists.
right.
So
Could add a bunch more blocking.
Do you think that would help?
I mean, if the subfloor is the issue, then yeah.
I mean, anything to make the entire assembly
unitize
more
it.
rigid. Yes.
I suggested to him on the phone that he could put a flush beam there and temporarily hold up the floor on both sides of it with temporary walls. That wouldn't be hard to do.
So you're saying cut in a center beam,
Yeah.
dividing the joist spans in half. Yeah.
But intuitively, I don't think that's a problem because of the freaking LVL joists he now has. I mean,
Yeah.
like, that is overkill.
But at the same time, the height of the LVL has a lot to do with deflection numbers. So if he's adding more joists, but they're not very tall, it's not going to help as much as you think.
Yeah, because 13 feet is pretty much the limit of a 2x8, pretty much even at the highest grade lumber that you can get. So,
yeah, like if he had sistered those things up with taller LVLs, he might have been better off to sister every other one with a taller LVL.
Yeah, but he's got a ceiling height issue, so he can't do that.
So he'll just have to crawl around in his basement.
You gotta pay attention.
I heard that part, but the thing is, if your solution doesn't work, I would think that
he's screwed.
He's gonna have to tear out his drywall and add a flush beam with a couple of posts.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the ductwork is in the way, right? And I'm sure there's other stuff. That's never an easy thing to do.
No.
Yeah, with the amount of stuff that he's got going on there, it's hard to
imagine
really
a center beam there.
Well, or a lot of, I guess, options.
Yeah.
Offer a lot of options for that.
Right. That's why I think you should just put on 5/8 drywall and enjoy the bounce. And your kids won't be running around like that forever. So,
What about plywood?
as dampening as weight?
Well, yeah, sort of like as a stress skin panel.
Well,
that's sort of like
that's just like your solid plywood sheathing just on the other side of the floor.
Right.
I think that would help.
So is it only when his 2-year-old runs around that this happens? Because maybe he just needs to train the 2-year-old to run differently. Because if you take longer, if you take longer strides, you tend not to have as hard of an impact on the floor. And
it is amazing how little people can make so much noise with their running. It's like child probably weighs 20 or 30 pounds.
Maybe
right?
he needs some squishier soled shoes for the little kid or something.
Yeah,
like
send
that.
the kid to running camp.
Yeah.
Slippers. I don't think it's going to be a problem. And I base this on very little.
Well, it's certainly not. The floor's definitely not going to be going anywhere with all those LVLs.
God, I know.
That's a lot of money there.
I know.
Adding all that.
And once again, his work is impeccable, right? Look at a beautiful job he did doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of weird notches at the ends, but that's not. It doesn't look like anything he did. It looks like that was already like that. I don't think that's contributing to anything, but it's it makes some.
So I said to him, I was like, I just don't think you have enough weight on that floor. And he said, well, we have a dinette set in there. I'm like doing the math. I'm like, well, that's like, what, 200 pounds?
Yeah.
Like, when you're talking about a ceiling's worth of drywall, you're talking about hundreds or thousands of pounds, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What he could do is go buy some tube sand, put it on the floor,
and test it out.
Have the kid run around and see
that's
see
the
if
smart
it,
thing. Yeah,
it
so
works.
to go buy 20 bags of tube sand,
Or figure out whatever the weight of the drywall would be.
yeah,
Just invite over 5 of your fattest friends
And just stand there.
Don't waste your money on sand.
And just keep bringing them drinks so they just stay in one place.
Yeah, so that's it. You have a bunch of people over for cards night. Sitting at the table in the middle of the room where you put all the weight. They're sitting there, and then have the kid run around.
I think we're doing some science here. Ben, let us know. That's fantastic. All right, this is from Matthew. The recent talk about Patrick's oxy fuel bottles and his trip to the welding store has sparked a question. You see what he did there?
He's so funny.
That's awesome. I'm a certified welding inspector and work on various commercial building projects, yet no home building projects. The closest would be certifying a company for the welding of extensions onto metal screws and helical piles. That's another one of our favorite topics, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Helical piles.
Definitely one of yours.
Oh, man, I love them things.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get mine.
I try to bring those up at any opportunity.
Are you going to put them at your house?
I think that's I'm going to hold the insulation on my foundation walls.
I know that they're not cheap, but as affordable as those things are, I have 10 different places on my property where I would love to have a little porch roof someday or a deck or whatever. I feel like I should just have a guy come when I got some extra cash burning a hole in my pocket and just scatter them about all over the yard.
Just in case you need to build something there. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Put up an array of flagpoles.
I was thinking you could adopt a recumbent bicycle to drill your own in there, right? Because you already got the power point out in front of the front wheel.
Yeah.
You just need some gearing.
I actually was thinking the other day about, could you just buy them and install them yourself if you had the right equipment? There was a Jeep for sale with a PTO on the back on Craigslist the other day. And I was like, I could build a little right-angled drill on the back of the Jeep to drive those things into the ground, right?
You don't get permits for any of your projects anyway, so who's going to stop you? All right.
Okay,
His
serious.
question is, when welded structural steel is used for residential construction, is this work done by a certified welder or someone that has a welder and knows how to burn rod? Is there? I guess there's something. Two different things. Makes sense. Are the architects/engineers that call out the use of metal members calculating out the shear strength of welds and inspecting them to a code, or just having the welder place a weld of undetermined size and quality and just check to see if the metal is melted? If the welding codes are called out, are they normally AWS, ICC, or some other governing body? Any insight would be appreciated. Keep up the great work as I enjoy learning new things every podcast as an aspiring DIYer. Thanks, Matthew. So I did what I often do for these kinds of questions is I went to the code book, the IRC. I looked in the 2015 edition. That's my favorite one presently. So I looked up welding. Nothing. I looked up steel, span tables for light gauge steel, structural steel, not red iron, like moment frames and like little steel.
Cold form steel.
Yeah.
Yep.
Span tables and all the stuff for that, the fastening schedules and header tables, all that. Nothing about structural steel of any quality in the index, and I was just like, boy, that seems like who is? What are the rules? I don't know.
So, I've worked on a lot of old houses over the years and never been responsible for speccing any steel work. In fact, pretty much every time I've ever seen it used, it was specced by an engineer. So we would have had an engineer stamp the drawings for whatever detail we were going to do. But
I'm going to interrupt you. So did the engineer then inspect the work to ensure it was done correctly? Because I think that's where this falls down.
Well, so the thing is, the engineer that I'm thinking of that used to work on a lot of our projects, I know he's been to some of the projects because, in fact, one of them was his in-laws' house. But I don't remember, I just can't really remember there being regular inspections by the engineer of the actual installed details.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, one, I think the rules are going to vary widely based on where you are, just like they are for all kinds of code enforcement stuff.
Sure.
So I think there's probably parts of the country where you can do whatever you want and nobody's going to question it. But as far as what code has to say about it or who's going to do the inspection,
No,
I have no idea.
So it makes me think that that's part of the reason why every engineered detail I've ever done on a small modeling job, it just seems like it's way overbuilt, and it's probably because they just know they're covering their butt. The engineer has to design for the worst case scenario.
The worst possible job.
Yeah.
I think the engineer is ultimately responsible to ensure that the work is done to their plans. But whether that inspection process is happening, I would say it's going to vary.
Yeah.
I can bet that the projects like we witnessed in Brooklyn, someone's looking at those welds because the stakes are high.
Yeah, I mean, because those inspectors are even also looking just for another chance to get some fees for coming into the permit and all that.
Well, and they're attached dwellings, so what you do to your unit has potential implications to your neighbors. So I mean, for everybody's safety, that's really important that that's done correctly.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about buildings that are 150 years old. That they were talking about how they pulled the parge coat off of one of those brick walls and it was just held up with dirt, and meanwhile these guys are removing basement walls in buildings that are 4 stories tall while they put in steel beams to hold up 4 stories of brick. And I don't know how they do that.
Mind-blowing.
I don't know how they do that.
I talked to, I forget his name now, but I talked to him about that. I was like, I don't know how you slept. He's like, I didn't sleep for a week when this was going on. And they have to drag all that steel in the house by hand. Like, they're carrying it.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, I wish I had a more definitive answer, but I think it's still the Wild West with regard to steel construction and residential building, largely.
Yeah, I mean, what about the popularity now of steel staircases in houses? I mean, we recently featured a staircase
so
being
tell
built.
us about that. Yeah. Matt, you recently...
Yeah, these are guys who, a crew, a company that works in an area where it's kind of difficult to get some stuff fabricated and delivered in a timely fashion. There's kind of a booming building market, but not a lot of like these specialties. And so they ended up buying some welding equipment and learning how to do it, do some
So the
welding
GC was
themselves.
doing their
Yeah,
steel.
yeah, and they started out. A lot of it was just because they needed like posts, in the basement and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and they wanted to, basically it would take like 2 weeks to get a plate welded on just so they could stick this thing in. So they bought their own welder and they were doing some of that stuff, and then they've kind of like graduated over time to do some other stuff. And I don't know who's inspecting their stuff, and I don't know who. I think they're designing a lot of their own stuff, so I don't really know exactly how that works.
So once again, to you all out there listening, if you have experience in this arena, please share it with us to tell us how that's working, and if there's been any problems with inspections with regard to welded steel and stuff like that.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
said, I don't know that anybody's really inspecting like wood staircases to see how they're built up.
I mean,
either, so-
exactly.
I think from my experience with inspections in projects like this is that if there's an engineer's stamp on it,
That's all.
the inspector thinks it looks like what it shows on the drawing, that's probably about as far as it goes.
Well, I think Matthew's point is though, like, what does the inspector know about welding? And it's a very good point. I hadn't thought about it. So we're going to do something just a little different for this final segment here of the show. Well,
Okay.
it's the second to final, but the second finalist. This is a question that we want all you out there to weigh in on, please. And do you want to tell the listeners, Matt, how the genesis of this question?
I sort of know the genesis of it. Our boss
Our boss came
Justin
to us,
Fink,
came to us yesterday.
Yeah, and he saw this house. It's like a 9,000 square foot house that they're going to do what sounds like a deep energy retrofit on to make it essentially into a net zero ready house. And essentially the question is like, I don't know. Is this house too big?
Yeah, is there like anything inherently wrong about a 9,000 square foot house, and can it be made better with a deep energy retrofit?
And does it matter?
Does
Like,
it matter?
Yeah, like maybe not. Does it matter that you're doing this deep energy retrofit? But is that too much house for anybody? There's like a whole bunch of questions here.
And so we want to hear your thoughts on this. As you might imagine, we all have our opinions, but part of the discussion that we're going to have is going to be your responses to this question, because we're all interested. And I think there's ethical and moral questions and building questions all in this discussion.
So basically the question is it too big, and are you actually making a meaningful improvement on a house that might be too big by making it more energy efficient?
Yeah, and if it's not too big, what is too big? Is there too big?
Yeah, because you're going to save energy, but the amount of embodied energy that goes into the materials to make that better, that's
we're
sort of a crux.
We are not putting our stake in the ground just yet.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just something to consider.
It's something to consider. I think it's a fantastic question, and I hope you all are willing to participate. And I'll tell you what, if we read your response, we will send you an FHB podcast sticker.
And if we get lots of good responses, maybe we'll do these kinds of questions more often.
Yeah, if it's not too much work for me, I think it's awesome.
I don't care how much work it is for you.
You've made your feelings known about decks in the past. Mm-hmm. You and Kylie have
battled on this before.
have a ongoing battle about decks versus patios.
Yep.
And what do you see as the problems with decks?
Just that, well, one, that they require a lot of maintenance, and two, they can fall down. And a patio won't fall down. That's the main thing.
Well, it depends on what's underneath it.
Yeah, yeah. If a river washes underneath your patio, there is a chance that it could get undercut and washed out. Yes.
But generally speaking, you feel that decks are potentially dangerous because of their wood construction and bad detailing.
And I would say more that my problem is with decks that are attached to the house, because it's sort of like introducing a lot of problems that wouldn't exist if the deck weren't there.
What if I could show you a deck that solved all of these problems and was good to look at? What would you say? Can you do that, Patrick?
I would say, could you do that? And if such a thing exists, bring it to my house.
I might just be able to do that if you're on a waterway, because once again, one of my Facebook friends posted this on, and what we're looking at is a deck that was formerly a pontoon boat, and has lovely and sturdy aluminum railings. It's not going to collapse because it's already on the ground, resting on these very weight distributing pontoons. And I thought of the added benefit that should the high waters come, you get on the thing and you just take it to safety.
Yeah,
It's an escape boat.
It's the
Escape
perfect
deck.
prepper's deck.
And they even painted the old railings on the boat to nicely match
So
the blue shutters on the house.
I think they actually made the house match the pontoon boat, if I had to guess, yeah.
That's true. That does look like an old pontoon boat color.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Now you're making fun of this, right? But
No.
I'm not making fun of this. Well, maybe a little, but I think it's awesome.
Well, there's a couple of holes in your hypothesis here. For one thing, that the deck on a pontoon boat is usually made out of plywood, right? Underneath,
Is it?
Underneath like all weather carpeting.
Oh, man.
But if you replaced it with the aluminum decking that is on typical docks,
Right.
that would be a good solution, I think.
Yeah.
But now, you know that half of my property is on the Housatonic River, is in the floodplain.
Yes?
And we're not allowed to build anything in the floodplain, but we have this beautiful waterfront
It's
property
flat,
that's
yeah.
perfectly flat with a beautiful field with a fire pit that we hang out in. And it's far from my house. And, we go boating down there. We hang out and have campfires down there. And I'm like, it would really be nice to at least have a shed. But in the summer, when it's really buggy, it would even be nice to have a little gazebo down there. And I was thinking,
Build it.
pontoon boat, it's not building a structure. I'm just parking my boat
Right.
in my lower yard.
I got to wonder if that's part of this dodge, too, is that they were too close to setbacks, and they're like, no, you can't build a deck. And they're like, well, I'm going to park my boat there.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? If I bought a pontoon boat, built a nice little screen porch on it, had a place to store my paddles for my canoe in there, had a little table and chairs.
I think it's awesome. And then the added benefit is if you have high water in the springtime, you take it for a ride on the Housatonic with your gazebo on there.
Yeah, I'll just throw an anchor. I'll just keep it anchored to the lawn.
Yeah. That's
And,
the main thing.
yeah.
You got to get one of those helical piers.
What do you think?
Attach it to it.
Yep.
What do you think about this, Jeff?
It's just delightful.
It is. It's fun.
I will say that I have to say I definitely married the right woman, because she is in on not only that galvanized siding on my Victorian house idea I had before, but she loves the idea of me finding a pontoon boat as long as it's cheap enough to have a gazebo down by the river.
Wow. That is.
Just find someone else on the same river who has a pontoon boat.
Yeah.
Go there at night.
Yeah, I've actually lost some boats that way in my yard. So
I'm thinking we should host a podcast from your pontoon boat gazebo.
sounds good. You got to help me find it first.
I'll keep my eye out. And you all, too, find a boat for Rob.
Yeah, anybody in the Western Connecticut or Hudson,
we'll come get it anywhere.
Hudson Valley area, anywhere within like an hour radius of New Milford, Connecticut. I've got a truck with a trailer hitch. If anybody's got a free pontoon boat out there, just let me know.
It doesn't even need to be
I will come
seaworthy.
and take it away for free.
What else you got for Rob? Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to all you guys for joining me, Matt, Rob, and Jeff. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. And if we read your question on the air, we'll send you an FHB podcast sticker. Please include a mailing address, or I'll hassle you afterward to get it. Thanks for listening. Happy building.